All right, we're going to be working on Chapter 2 tonight. We're going to begin with some lecture materials talking about the Chapter 2 concepts, and this is the chapter in the book where we actually begin to learn how to work with SQL, or the structured query language. The objectives for the chapter are outlined in the next two slides, and those are reiterated at the top of our Unit 2 folder if you're following along. So we're going to learn a whole bunch of commands, and as I mentioned a little earlier tonight, you know, as far as web programmers go, most of you fall into that category. This might be as much as you need to really truly learn about SQL to be an effective web programmer, but the additional knowledge can empower you so much, it can really make you a valuable asset at just about any company. So, all right. All right, let's talk about what we're going to talk about, basically. And most of the stuff that we're doing here is going to involve queries that, for the most part, are going to pull off of one table. That's kind of the point of this slide. So that's why they call them single table queries. All right. Business intelligence. Now, this is a term that you hear quite a bit, and this is probably a little bit more of interest to people that are in the data analytics program, because in that program, we really look at business intelligence as being a really significant aspect of, you know, that field. Because a business that's armed with knowledge has power to increase their profits, to compete against others, to prepare for a future that's well targeted, you know, to manage their finances, and it becomes really important organizationally when we start to put business intelligence systems into place. Now, the fascinating thing about this is, in the old days, we'd have all this data, and even with databases, it did not necessarily give you intelligence about something. It's how you look at it that really gives you the intelligence. Now, what's happened since the early days of databases is we now have a significant amount of software out there, and some example pieces of software would be like a product called Tableau, for example, or Microsoft's Power BI, that are systems that have built into them the ability to look at your data and give you information that is at a significantly higher level. So it's being generated by the software rather than a manager who happened to have an MBA or something like that. But it still takes a certain amount of knowledge to pull something useful out of it, in my opinion. When we look at what we are going to be doing with a structured query language, first of all, it's always good to ask, and I don't know if this book does it formally, but every time I would teach databases in the past, I always look at the word query, and where does the word query come from? And you know, a lot of people don't know, right? The word question is related to the word query. So if I'm querying you about something, I'm asking you a question about it. And more importantly, I'm trying to extract information from you. So I might ask you a question and you might not respond, but a query really is intended to extract information. So that, I think, is pretty important. Now, in terms of what they mean here by ad hoc queries, they say ad hoc questions that can be answered using database. Like, how many customers in Portland, Oregon bought our green baseball cap? That's something a company might ask. You know, so maybe they're trying to launch a marketing campaign there. But what does the word ad hoc mean? Yeah, on the fly. I mean, kind of like most of your Google searches, like, hey, what time is the movie playing tonight? Well, where's the closest Pizza Hut? You know, it's a kind of an ad hoc query, and that happens in business all the time, right? Databases that are set up well often have little things pre-built into them where people can ask ad hoc queries. Google's kind of a really good example of that, right? You just drop words in it and it brings the information back. However, you can't anticipate all scenarios. So you might have certain scenarios that you anticipate and certain ones that you don't. But when you have an ad hoc query, then all of a sudden you have to learn how to build the query to actually get the information. So it's a separate kind of issue. Now, this book is using this particular database to do all the examples. Now, when we get to the examples later in this PowerPoint, I think, and I'm still debating in my head a little bit, I think I might pull this database in and I'll show you how to do that. And we'll do our queries just like the PowerPoint is doing and hopefully have matched results. So for right now, I'm going to kind of skip past a bunch of slides here, but they have a complete breakdown. I mean, if you're curious, I guess I can kind of quickly rifle through them. They just talk about what the company is and their background, how they're pulling their sales in, how they're storing their information, and this is kind of interesting if you start to look at it in that thing. They show you how their tables are structured and linked. You know, the metadata for the tables, like we were talking about. I think that's helpful to know as well. And then how you might pull data on how all the stuff links back and forth together. But ultimately, I'm looking to arrive at this slide here, right? So you have this background on the company. If you really want the background in depth, go back and read those slides or read the book. But let's look at the definition here of structured query language. And it says here it was developed by the IBM Corporation in the late 70s. So that's pretty interesting. We did learn that a relational database system was first created by another IBM person back in 1970. So it took them a while to come up with a query language to work with it. By 1992, it was converted into a standard. And so there is a formalization, at least of the base part of the language. And then, of course, they've updated it over time. And then you'll notice that the newer ones include some of the more modern, language structures, I guess I'll call them, XML and JSON, and also some object-oriented things, which is big in database programming these days. There is this whole debate, too, and we should probably talk about this. There are people that call it, they see this acronym here and they call it SQL, and then you have the people that call it SQL, right? And you hear me saying both, right? And that's what most database people do. But there are people out there, especially old school database people, that might even get offended if you call it one thing over the other, and it's all relative to the systems that they worked on. So if you find IBM people, they'll typically say, it's not SQL, it's SQL. It's an acronym, right? And they get really adamant about it. So, and then, of course, correct yourself right away. I know what it stands for. It's Structured Query Language. I apologize. I don't want to offend the IBM database gurus. All right. Some important tips. This is not a programming language. I think it's interesting that they call it a full-featured programming language because it does do some programmatic things. But technically, it is not a language that compiles code. Okay, so it's not really a programming language like C or C#. They say here it's a data sublanguage for creating and processing database data and metadata, both. And notice it is ubiquitous in enterprise class DBMSs. So you can transport this knowledge, and it's kind of expected if you ever do database work that you at least have the base knowledge of what we get in maybe the first few chapters of this book. And notice it says it's a critical skill. I agree. You cannot be in a development program, frankly, web or software or whatever, that does not do some database, because then you're kind of not really considered a programmer in some capacities, because most powerful products tend to interface with databases. So there's different categories on top of it all, and this is where it gets a little messy. You know, kind of like learning some of these acronyms and stuff. And I want to kind of touch upon this a little bit, and they even have, I think, a chart later talking about where in the book these are covered. But we have these terms that people throw around when they're database people. So sometimes you hear people throw out DDL and DML. Those are really common ones to throw out there. And so one is the data definition language, and the other one is the data manipulation language. And notice after it's statements, so they're like a conglomeration of different words put together. We also have these other things where we have stored modules or SQL-PSM, and what that means is we create blocks of code that we can pull back and use as a block of code. We also have what we call TCL, Transaction Control Language, which helps us to process data on large scales. And then we also have a data control language, and all those are more statement-based than anything else. For us, when we start to learn some of these acronyms and how to apply them, this particular language, the DDL, is used, as it says, for creating tables, relationships, and other structures. So there's, we look at like that slide from Access where we're kind of linking the tables together, and a lot of databases have tools where you can do it graphically like that. But how would you do it in the past before then? Well, you would use DDL to do it. So there's actually a language that specifies those relationships. That's covered in Chapter 7. What we are about to learn is the DML, which is how we actually pull data out of a database predominantly. So we're going to use select and insert and update and delete. And you guys that have maybe had a little bit of a flavor of databases might relate those statements to something called CRUD. And we'll talk about that, which is create, retrieve, update, and destroy. And if you look at those, they kind of correspond. And this is where we start in Chapter 2. So this is Chapter 2, so that's the stuff we're going to be looking at. Some of these higher end things will be talked about in later chapters. So yes, you can have variables and flow statements and things like that. And also look at the other database products that are out there. They also talk a little bit about this, and those are also covered in the later chapters as well. I don't know if we'll get to this level in this class. We can only hope. And then there's also the same thing is covered, DCL is also covered in the same chapters. Right, but now we are going to move into the first thing that we are going to learn about SQL statements. So there is kind of this really general basic form of a SQL statement. And in its most, core base level, yeah, bless you. It's something that I've retained over all the years, from, my initial encounter with a database product was I was in my senior seminar as an undergrad, and that was basically where I could study whatever I wanted in IT with supervision. And because my program at that time did not have a database class, I'm like, well, I want to learn about databases. Like Wise Choice, they handed me a box of software, Fox Pro. Fortunately, I had a book with it and the discs, and said, here you go, we'll see you at the end of the semester. That's a senior seminar for me. So I went all the way through that book, and I got other books, and I built the sample project that was in there and learned about it. But I did learn one really thing that stuck in my head is most SQL statements tend to be in the form where they include these three keywords. Usually you're selecting something, either a specific column or a bunch of columns from a table. Where are you selecting them from? You're going to give the table name, and then sometimes you have conditions. So you're going to say the condition might be where there's no first name, or there's no address, or the name equals this, or the person is from this city, for example. And the other real key piece is that this is a semicolon delimited language. So the semicolon is the little identifier that says the statement's done. And if you guys have ever typed in a SQL statement from a command prompt and you press enter and you forget to hit the semicolon, it'll give you nothing until you put the semicolon in, which is kind of interesting. But that's our general three key terms to get us started. So this is a really important piece here. Select, from, and where, and then the semicolon to terminate the statement. Select which columns from which tables, where what conditions are you looking for? And then that's the information I'm going to give you. All right. So now they start to get into a bunch of examples. And now we can just look at these examples, but I think what is much more empowering is if we actually try them. Are you guys game to do this? All right. So here's what I'm going to do. For a moment, I'm going to pause really quickly and make sure I can access, I forget the name of the company, COD something or other, COD Sports or something, from the repositories that come with the book, and then I will unpause the video and then show you how to pull them in. We'll all pull them in, and then we'll start to try the exact queries we're seeing on the screen and see if we can get them to work, because I think that is how you guys will be best prepared to move into the future on this stuff. All right, so I'm pausing just for a moment. Okay, so once you're in the resources section of our website, you're going to notice that I have this student data files zip here, which contains all the example databases from our textbook. Now it contains them in all the different formats, so Access, Oracle, MySQL, and SQL Server, all of those formats for all the databases. So there's a lot of redundant info there, and I think maybe in the future what I'll do is maybe I'll trim that down. But I guess it's not that big a deal to download it. If you don't need them, you can delete the stuff you don't need. Once you do have it downloaded and unzipped, you'll get a folder on your machine that's structured like the one I'm navigating through right now. And you can see inside here we will have a folder that says SQL Server Management Studio. And I'm going to go in there, and then there's a projects folder. And then I believe that we're working with the Cape Cod database in this PowerPoint, and I'm going to go into that folder. Once I get there, I will have a couple of tables that are basically text files with an SQL extension on it. These files, because they're just simply text files, they can be opened up with any decent text editor. I'm going to use Notepad++ right now, and I'm going to open up each one. And I want to show you what's inside. So here's the first one. This is one that says create table. So if I look inside here, and I don't expect that you guys understand this code yet, but what it is, this is all the code it takes to create all the information that goes inside that database. You guys catching me? Right? And now this right here says that we should use the Cape Cod database, but I haven't created it yet. But however, we do have all the tables, and you can see inside here each table has a create command, so I can actually execute this script inside of my SQL Server Management Studio and create these tables. However, I also need to have the Cape Cod database. Now I'm going to open up the other file that's in there, and I'm going to drop that in Notepad++ again, and then I'm going to take a little bit of an examination here and look and see, all right, this seems to have all the data that should go into all the tables. What it does not have is the command to actually create the database. You guys noticing that? And so anybody who's done this before will have a little bit of a clue. So what we need to do inside of SQL Server is this. We need to actually create a new database named exactly the way this one is named. So Cape Cod, so two capital C's, and an underscore. Thank you. So I'm going to go over to SQL Server, and currently in SQL Server, I guess I have this properties window open from my previous example, and I'm going to actually close all the little separate windows I have. And right now, you'll see that I have the AdventureWorks database that we needed to have loaded up, expanded. I'm actually going to collapse that down like this. I do need to create a new database, and you know what? Maybe the one inclination is maybe I can right-click my way into that, right? Or choose a menu. And you know what? There's ways you can do that. But I'm going to show you the manual way, which I think is probably a little bit more of a takeaway for you. So I'm going to just like right click and notice how it just says new database. So I could choose this and create it. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and just click on it. I just want to show you that it brings up an interface, and it's going to tell me to choose a bunch of different options here, right? And it doesn't really sort of matter what we call it, but I'm not going to create Cape Cod right now. I'm just going to create something else just to show you how it's done this way. So I'm just going to create one, and I'm just going to call it test DB. That's fine. And you know what? That's all I have to do. And I can click OK, and I got a new database. Anything else I need to do to this database in the aftermath that I might be able to control from this interface, I can do in the aftermath after it is created. Right. So what kind of stuff might I do? Well, the only way you're going to know that is to actually read through. So in the General tab, it looks like I can figure out how many rows I want, and there's a log file. I can go into the Options tab, and it's like, oh my God, there's all these like choices I don't understand. I think I'm going to ignore them. Okay, that's fine. Eventually, you'll get to understand what some of those are. And then there's file groups, like where it's being stored. And so you can really kind of see it almost doesn't really matter what I select here. It's kind of my point. I can just say OK. The fascinating thing is this little dialog also provides a script window. And I'm waiting for that to launch. Now you can see that it like pre-creates a whole bunch of other stuff. So it's got all these commands and whatever that help you to create a database, you know, as we say, properly, right? So that it fits into certain formats. It's stored in the right place. It starts with a certain size and allows it to grow up to a different size. You know, and those are all probably wise choices, frankly. Okay. So this is when I hit. So in other words, when I hit this OK button here, it's really running all these commands. That's what it's telling you. You have the capability by hitting that script button to actually see what commands it's typing in the background to do that. But really, ultimately, all you need to do to create the database is to issue this command here at the top. And so that's what I'm going to teach you how to do. So I'm going to click cancel here, and I'm going to close this script window. And then what we're going to do is we're going to type, or not type, we're going to hit this button here in the toolbar that says new query. Now, I don't know if you noticed, and there's some different schools of thought here. I'm just going to go back to the PowerPoint for just a really quick second. Let's see if we can find it. All right. When they give us our first example here, you're going to notice that the keywords that they showed us are printed in all caps. Now, when they first developed this language, all the keywords for SQL were required, and this is the way that I learned when I was younger, you had to type them in all caps in order for them to work. And the book follows that convention. And you know what? You can keep following that convention, but the truth is that you can use lowercase now too. Right. However, I'm going to stick with uppercase because it's kind of more formally correct. And I'm just going to put out this command. I'm just going to type right into the editor, create database, all caps, and then I need to give it a name. Okay. Now, with most SQL languages, I can just type the name of the database. I'm going to experiment first. I hope that's okay, right? So I did a test database. You know what? I didn't actually create it, so I can still use that name. So I'm just going to type test DB and put in a semicolon. Where's my database? Didn't work. Well, you guys know I wrote code, right? And don't look around the screen. I didn't run the query yet. All I did was type it up. But I have a complete statement here that just says create database, test DB with a semicolon. I'm zooming in on it so you guys can see it. Notice how the keywords that SQL recognizes are converted to blue. So that means that those are what we call reserve words for the language. So I'm not really supposed to call my database or create, so you can see why. And then in order to actually execute the query, notice that they have a little execute button. And notice that there's also a shortcut key for it, F5, which is really common in a lot of coding tools. So I'm going to go ahead and click execute, and hopefully it doesn't squawk at me, right? And notice what it said. What did it say? Commands completed successfully. Completion time. Okay. I didn't see it pop up here. You guys see it pop up here? And this is one of the quirks of SQL Server Management Studio. It is not like Chrome where it automatically refreshes itself, right, like newer browsers. You actually have to come in here and either right-click and refresh, or come up here and hit the spinning wheel, right, little circle thing, and refresh. Notice I collapsed it, but now when I expand, now I have my database. Okay? Okay, now if I can create a test DB, I can also create a Cape Cod, right? And that's what we're doing, folks. That's our next thing. So I could take this file that I've created here, and I don't know if you guys noticed, but it actually creates a file, and you can save these files too if you want. Now I could create a new query, or it's right here. I'm just going to type right inside here. It doesn't matter, right? And I want to make sure that I put in the Cape Cod name just the way it's listed here. So I'm going to say use Cape Cod, and you know what? There's no better way to copy it than to actually copy paste it. Then I know I'm not mistyping it. So I'm just copying that right out of my Notepad++ and pasting it in right here. Once again, I'm going to go ahead and execute the query. You're going to see, once again, it says that it did it successfully. You can see, once again, it didn't refresh. So I am going to go ahead and do the refresh, then expand databases, and then hopefully I've got Cape Cod here. Now the next thing that we're going to do is this. I'm going to take those two files, and we're going to drop the code from those files right into this window and execute it. I'll talk about it as we go, but before we proceed, I just want to ask really quick. All right, I'm going to bop back over to my Notepad++, and I do have both of those files open. But before I can insert data, I want to create the tables. So I'm going to go to this file here. So that file is called all this gobbledygook, but at the end it says create tables. So I'm going to just come in here, and I'm going to do, I can do a Control-A and copy it all, but I really don't care about these top lines. I mean, that's very nice that they put their info in there, but I don't need that. So I'm going to copy all the lines inside here all the way down, highlighted them all, and then I'm just doing Control-C to copy. And then I'm going back over to SQL Server Management Studio. I'm going to replace the code that's in the window right now, and I'm just going to do a Control-V to paste. And yes, I am hyper zoomed in so it looks huge. And yes, I'm going to minimize this so you don't have to look at quite that much. All right. But if you scroll back up, you're going to see that everything that I pulled in is in there. Now, we don't have to worry right now about the syntax of these commands, except for this. That top statement says, use Cape Cod. Now that statement tells the database engine that the commands that I'm about to run should not attach to any old database. It shouldn't go to AdventureWorks or TestDB. This should go to Cape Cod. That's all it means. So that's a use. Use Cape Cod. Which database am I using? Use Cape Cod. And then from there, it's going to go through, and it doesn't take much of a genius to figure out that it's going to be creating tables with these names. And so I'm going to go ahead now and execute this query. So I'm hitting the play button, and then I've got errors. Does everybody have errors? We got one error. State 1, line 4, incorrect syntax near buyer. And I know what the error is. Query completed with errors. Well, you know how I know that my query completed? because I can actually go into the database and see if I have my tables. And you know what? I don't have my tables. It got stuck. Right? It didn't actually create them. Yours worked. Okay, well, yours worked just fine. Why did yours work and not mine? You are special. Yeah, I have some suspicions as to why, but let's see if we can figure it out. Normally, when you execute commands like this, I would typically have like a semicolon at the end here. So you ran this query and it ran just fine? Okay. So maybe there was something wrong with my copy paste is what you're indicating to me? All right. Well, since that failed for me, I have a different approach I could use. I can also do this. I can go ahead and open a file, and I can go actually locate that query in my file system. And let me see if that approach will work. So this is kind of the fun part of experimenting a little bit. See how many folders deep I have to go. That's a lot of folders. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and open this, and it's just going to open up in the window here. And you know what? I'm going to try running it this way. So maybe, and this can happen because when I'm switching between this sort of a file and then bringing it into Notepad++, Notepad++ may in fact be altering the encoding. What? Okay, so Brenda was using Visual Studio Code and didn't run into this issue. And that's a Microsoft product, and this is a Microsoft product. So because my copy paste didn't work, I instead now am just pulling the file directly into the environment. So let's see if this works. So I'm going to go ahead and hit execute. And look, it works. All right, so wonderful. Now if I did that with the one file, I'm going to do it with the next file. So I'm going to go back to File again. I'm going to choose Open, and then I'm going to choose File. This time I'm going to choose Insert Data. So we already created the tables. Now I didn't look to see that the tables were created, did I? You know what, let me open this file first. So I'm going to open that. And this is the set of commands that will actually add the data to the tables. But first, I'm a little paranoid, and I hope you guys are this way a little bit too. So I'm going to refresh that view, and now I'm going to go into the tables here. Oh, wow, I do have the tables. Do you guys have any clue what DBO means? Absolutely, database object. How wonderful is that? So it's telling you that this database system is treating that table as an object. And if you compare that to programming, think of when you do Java programming, how you have private data fields. Those are like your columns. And then you have getters and setters. That's how you add and delete information. And then sometimes you have custom code that goes with it. And every time you instantiate it, it's an object. Kind of what a table is. Every time you add a row, you're instantiating an object. All right, but now we're going to run this script. And I'm just going to go ahead and click back on the file. And now the execute button is available. So I'm going to hit execute. And then you'll see the output. So if you look at the output results for this is a little bit different. Because for every row of data that it added, now you can't tell, but I'm actually scrolling through that list at the bottom. If you watch my scroll bar here on the side, it's actually moving. But it all says 1 row affected. Okay, 9 rows affected. But it did populate all the tables. So now if I once again refresh, come back, look at my tables, and then pick, I don't know, inventory perhaps, and then look at the columns, I can see the items are there, and then is there a way that I can actually view the table? How do I view the table? Has anybody ever done that before? Okay, this is what we're about to learn. This is what the select statements and the from and the where is for. So now we can go back to our PowerPoint, and this is where it gets fun. At least, this is the kind of what I consider fun, right? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to actually, here in this interface, I have these tabs, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to choose one of them, and maybe the first one that I started with. I'm just going to do a Control-A, and I'm just deleting everything out of it, so I have a blank space to work with. Could I have made a new tab? Sure. Does it really matter? No. Because I don't know if you're catching this, is once you type in a SQL command, if you really want to save it, you can. You can save it as a file so you can pull it back. But a lot of times you're just going to be typing a command to see what it does. And that's what we're doing right now. So now I'm bouncing back to the PowerPoint, and it says select SKU description, department, buyer, from SKU data. Is that a table that we have? And I'm coming over here and I'm going, yes, we have a table named SKU data. Does it actually have those columns? And notice as I expand in this tree here, there is a listing. SKU description, department, and buyer. Okay, so that's our structure. So I am going to take this text right from the slide, and I know this is kind of a primitive way to do it, but believe it or not, this is going to work, or it should work. Maybe I shouldn't be so brave, right? But notice two of the keywords that we were talking about, all right? First of all, do you notice that some of the stuff is underlined in red? To me, that's saying that it's not finding that piece of information. In fact, if I hover over it, it says invalid column name. However, we are not telling it which database we have more than one database. So here's the thing. So now we have to say use. What's the database called? CAPE. And notice how it finds it? The IntelliSense finds it for us. So I'm going to say use Cape Cod. In fact, here, what I could do is I could just first tell it to do that and then run the query. So let's just do that. Let's get rid of the query for a second. I'm just going to do this statement. I'm going to say execute. All right, it did it. Now that use statement, its only purpose is this. Which database am I using? Cape Cod. Why do I have to declare it? Because I have more than one. Okay. Now I can paste in my statement. And it's still underlining. Is that bad? It's okay. So let's go ahead and actually see if it's going to execute now. And then notice at the bottom, it gave us results. And I'm not sure if I can zoom on that. I thought there was a way to do it, but we'll do that in the future, I guess, perhaps. But it says here, it pulled back 13 records that look like this. So now I'm going to pull up the slide and go, does that look like what I have here? Yeah, sure does. All right, so what did we do? We went into the table. Which table? From the table SKU data, we looked at 4 of the columns. We pulled in all 4 of those columns in that order and all the data that was in them. So now, this is how we're seeing what's in our table. And you notice that the result is the table. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next example. The next one says, select star from SKU data. Well, I remember that one. So we can leave the SKU data part alone. So I'm going to put in an asterisk. And what does an asterisk mean in this context? Yeah, it's like everything. What's everything? I don't know, let's find out. Let's execute. And now it's pulling in everything from that table. Well, it just happens to be the same thing that we just did. You guys seeing the correlation here? If I control Z here, oops, control Y, and I just, let's say I eliminated buyer from this list, and then ran the query. Now it's only bringing in 3 of the columns. So now, you know, I'm trying to show you the functional difference. It's like, select what? All the columns from that table. So it's not unusual if you just want to see what's in a table. So if I wanted to see what's in retail order, I would just change this to and I see that it's pulling in from other databases. You guys see that? Did I so horribly misspell that? No. So those are our retail orders. Shows me everything in the table. All the columns and all their data. Okay, that's the example. Let's move on to the next one. Now, I am noticing we're out of time, so I'm going to do like 2 more examples, and then we're going to call it. But now that you guys have it loaded up, you should feel confident now that you can go through this whole PowerPoint and the whole chapter and try everything. All right, let's try this one. So, well, we kind of did that one already, right? Change the columns. Let's move on to the next one. And then they're trying to show you here by just changing the order of them, you can change the order of how it displays. All right, so I don't think I need to do that one either. You know what? I think we covered this enough. So this is where we're ending tonight on slide 31. And when we come back next week, we're going to pick up, we're going to try the examples, and we're going to start looking at the homework. The homework is going to have you looking at the AdventureWorks database to do the same thing. Okay? And we'll get through all of chapter 2 next week, and there'll be you'll be armed with enough info then to complete the homework. All right, folks, thank you very much, and we'll see you all next time.